She walked into court wearing quiet dignity only to be mocked, handcuffed, and silenced by those who claimed to serve justice. Alana Monroe, a black woman accused of assaulting a white officer, never raised her voice. But the system did everything it could to crush her. They didn't know she was the Deputy Director of Internal Affairs for the FBI, and that she was investigating them all along. How far will the courtroom go to protect its own corruption, and what happens when the truth walks in wearing handcuffs? If this story grips your heart like it did ours, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories. Let's step into the courtroom together and see what they tried to hide. The wooden door creaked open, heads turned, and then came that moment. The moment when silence becomes judgment. Alana Monroe stepped into the courtroom. No cuffs, no entourage, just her. A black woman walking into a place designed to make people like her feel small. But she didn't shrink. She didn't rush. She didn't explain. A murmur passed through the gallery like static. She wore a plain navy blouse, her hands steady, her face unreadable. And when she reached the defense table, there was no one waiting for her. No attorney, no family. Judge Gregory Langford raised an eyebrow. "Miss Monroe, representing yourself, I see," he said, voice soaked in amusement. A bold choice for someone facing charges of assaulting a police officer. Alana stood still. "I was assaulted, Your Honor. I'm just defending the truth." Langford chuckled softly, flipping through a folder like her words were a mild inconvenience. "We'll let the facts decide that, shall we?" From across the room, Assistant District Attorney Jessica Rayner adjusted her blazer and rose to her feet. "Your Honor," she said with practiced control on the evening of May 12th, Miss Monroe was stopped by Officer Brent Colby for questioning. According to the report, she became verbally aggressive, refused to comply with instructions, and then physically resisted when the officer attempted to detain her. He suffered bruising to his wrist. "We will present video footage and witness statements to confirm this account." Alana turned to the gallery. Her voice didn't rise, but it reached. "There's video," she said, "but I'd like the jury to watch what happens before it begins, and more importantly, what's missing." Jessica didn't flinch. "You'll have your chance." "Will I?" Alana asked, turning slowly toward the bench. "Because so far the only thing I've been given is the privilege of standing here while people decide whether I should be allowed to speak." From the audience, a boy no older than 10 leaned toward his mother. "What did she do wrong?" he whispered. His mother glanced down, hesitated, then said, "She disrespected a police officer." Alana heard it. Everyone heard it. Langford tapped his pen against his folder. "Let's keep this moving, Miss Monroe. This court doesn't run on feelings." Alana didn't blink. Apparently not. But it seems to run just fine on fear. The judge leaned forward. "Excuse me." She met his gaze. Fear of someone who doesn't shout, who doesn't fight back, someone who doesn't play the part you've written. That stirred the room. One juror shifted uncomfortably. Jessica cut in sharply. "Objection. The defendant is making inflammatory statements." "Sustained," Langford said. "Miss Monroe, you're not here to perform a monologue. If you have something useful to say, say it." Alana smiled faintly. "If being silent keeps me alive," she said, "I'll save my words for when they matter." And for the first time, the courtroom didn't quite know how to react. There was something unsettling in her calm. Not arrogance, not defiance, but precision. Like she already knew how this story would end, but wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of speeding it up. Jessica tried to regain control. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to call our first witness." Langford nodded. "Bring him in." As the door opened again, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Officer Brent Colby entered with the confidence of someone who knew the system was built for him. He glanced at Alana once, then looked away. But Alana didn't look at him at all. Her eyes were on the judge, not pleading, not begging, just watching, like someone who'd been watching all along. Brent Colby sat straight on the witness stand, hands resting on his knees as if he had nothing to hide. His face was calm, almost too calm, like a man who knew this courtroom had already decided whose story mattered. "She got loud," he said, eyes fixed on the jury. "She refused every order. I told her to stop moving. Instead, she started yelling and reached inside her coat. Quick. I thought she was going for a gun. I reacted how I was trained to react. I protected myself." He paused, letting the silence carry the weight of those words. It wasn't just a testimony, it was a performance, and he knew exactly how to deliver his lines. Langford gave a slow nod. "And what injuries did you sustain, officer?" "A mild sprain. Right wrist." She resisted when I tried to detain her. In the gallery, no one moved. The only sound was a chair creaking in the back row. Jessica Rayner rose smoothly, eyes scanning the room before turning to face the jury. "We'll now play security footage from the incident," she said. "The prosecution submits this as State's Exhibit 1. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered on. A camera angle from a nearby building showed a parking lot. Alana was standing next to her car. Officer Colby approached. The two appeared to speak. Then, without warning, the footage cut forward. Suddenly, Alana was on the ground, her arms pinned. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some leaned in. Some leaned back. The message had already landed. Due to a malfunction in the department's storage system, part of the recording was corrupted, Jessica explained. But what remains confirms Officer Colby's testimony. Miss Monroe refused to comply and was restrained accordingly. Alana stood slowly. "Your Honor, I'd like to request access to the raw surveillance file, uncut. I believe what's missing was not corrupted by accident." Langford did not look impressed. "Miss Monroe, unless you have technical proof to support such an accusation, I will not waste this court's time with theories. The footage has been submitted properly," Jessica added smoothly. "If she believes something improper occurred, she's welcome to file an external complaint. But that is outside the scope of this proceeding." Alana turned her voice even and sharp. "We both know why that footage vanished. And it's not a technical error." Langford's eyes narrowed. "You're skating dangerously close to contempt." Alana didn't step back. She didn't apologize. Instead, she looked to the jury. "What you see is what they've chosen to leave. But the truth is in what's missing. And they know it." A few jurors shifted in their seats. One crossed her arms tighter. Another looked down. Jessica spoke quickly, trying to regain control. "The defense is making unsupported allegations. There is no evidence of tampering." Langford banged his gavel once hard enough to silence the tension, but not the doubt. "Enough, Miss Monroe, you will stick to facts, not fantasies." Alana returned to her seat, but her words had already scattered across the room. She did not yell. She did not break. She simply left her silence hanging like a challenge. The courtroom grew colder. Colby avoided her eyes now. The same confidence that carried him into the room had thinned, if only slightly. One woman in the back whispered to her neighbor, "Did you see how fast that video cut?" The neighbor shook her head, but said nothing. Alana sat with her hands folded. Calm, but not still. Not numb. Her thoughts moved fast, and her eyes didn't rest on anything for long. Except once when she glanced at the little boy again, the one who had asked what she had done wrong. His mother leaned down, shushing him before he could speak again. Because sometimes the most dangerous question in the room isn't shouted. It's whispered by a child. And sometimes the most honest answer is the one no adult dares to give. As Alana settled back into her seat, the pressure in the room tightened around her like invisible thread. She had said her piece. Sharp, calm, but ignored. Now the courtroom returned to its rhythm. Papers rustling. A sigh from the jury box. A cough somewhere in the gallery. But her eyes searched for something else. Not validation, not sympathy. Just a thread of something real. That was when she saw him. Sitting near the back, not quite blending in, but not drawing attention either, was an older black man in a heavy wool coat. His posture was straight, almost formal, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on her steady and quiet, like he had been watching her long before this trial ever began. Alana blinked. There was something familiar in those eyes, something she couldn't quite place. Not yet. That man was Leonard Carter, retired courthouse doorman. 32 years in this very building. He had opened doors for judges and janitors, watched trials from the sidelines, and learned to keep quiet in places where speaking up meant trouble. He had not planned to come today, but something about the name Monroe had tugged at him. Something from a long time ago. As the prosecutor shuffled her files and the judge scribbled a note, Leonard's mind traveled back. It had been years, a different courtroom, a different trial, but the same faces of power. A young black boy stood trial for a robbery he did not commit. Leonard had stood by the courtroom doors watching the boy tremble in a shirt too big and shoes too thin. The lawyer barely looked at him. The judge never once made eye contact. When the guilty verdict came, the boy's mother cried out, and the bailiff escorted her out before her son could even say goodbye. Leonard had gripped the brass handle of the door so hard his palm ached for days. He remembered the look in that boy's eyes. Confused, not at the sentence, at how easily people moved on from it. And in the front row that day, quiet and still, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared. Watching. Learning. The same steady gaze he now saw in Alana Monroe. She was that child. And now she was here on trial facing a room just as indifferent. Leonard exhaled slowly. The memory landed like weight on his chest. But this time was different. She wasn't that child anymore. She was a woman. And she wasn't breaking. Alana looked away from him and faced forward. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she had seen him. And in seeing him, something inside her shifted. She remembered that hallway, that day, that pain. And she remembered the silence. Not her own, but his. He hadn't said a word back then, but neither had she. Now, without speaking, they understood something. That silence wasn't absence. It was survival. Leonard scanned the people seated near him. Young faces, distracted eyes. One girl whispered that the trial was boring and checked her phone. Leonard didn't blame her. They didn't know what they were watching. Most people never did. But he knew. He had watched too many lives disappear through courtroom doors. Too many verdicts written before the first word was spoken. Too many names no one remembered. No one. And yet here she was. A woman made of memory and grit and stillness. Their eyes met again for just a breath of a second. He gave a quiet nod. Small. Barely noticeable. Alana didn't nod back. She didn't break her expression. But she blinked. Once. Slowly. That was enough. No one else saw it. But it happened. Leonard sat back, his hands resting on the cane that had been more of a companion than a tool these past few years. He listened to the prosecutor drone on. He watched the judge scribble like he was already writing a closing. But Leonard knew something else. Alana was not here to beg. She was not here to plead. She was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. And Leonard Carter, who had seen so many moments wasted and lost, leaned back and whispered under his breath, "This time, someone will listen." The courtroom felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. Alana Monroe sat still, surrounded by voices that doubted her eyes, that judged her, and a system that had never been built for her to win. But she wasn't folding. She hadn't spoken much, but now, when silence had been forced upon her long enough, she decided it was time to let silence speak differently. Without warning, she stood up. There was no permission granted, no motion filed, just a deliberate act in a room that demanded obedience. She slid her arms out of her blazer slowly, her breath steady, her back straight. The fabric gave way to skin, and on her wrists and upper arms the bruises told a story no one had dared to write down. Deep purple arcs etched like silent screams. Swollen ridges, evidence of a grip too tight and a system too blind. A hush fell, the kind that made people forget to blink. The jury leaned in, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, a few with shame. Jessica Rayner scoffed, trying to recover the room's attention. "Your Honor, this stunt?" Judge Langford didn't stop her. He didn't say a word. He just narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into that familiar smirk. Alana didn't look at either of them. She bent slightly, pulled a thick sealed envelope from her bag, and walked forward without waiting to be called. She placed it gently on the clerk's desk as if it were a fragile thing that might crack open too loudly. "This," she said in a voice low but certain, "is a sealed internal affairs dossier. 11 years of filed complaints and unresolved investigations into Officer Brent Colby." Her words floated for a moment before sinking deep into the wood-paneled silence of the courtroom. Rayner tried to dismiss it. "That's inadmissible without verification." Alana met her eyes and replied softly, "Then verify it. But until then, it's more honest than anything he said today." Langford shifted, clearly annoyed. "This courtroom doesn't operate on drama, Ms. Monroe. You will sit down." Alana didn't, not yet. Instead, she reached into her bag once more, pulled out a discreet phone, and made a single call. The line picked up instantly. "Micah Green," she said quietly. Protocol 11. Activate silently. She hung up. No explanation, no grand performance, but that name, that phrase. It hovered in the air, unspoken but electric. It didn't matter if the courtroom didn't understand it. Someone would. From the gallery, Leonard Carter leaned slightly forward. He didn't know the full weight of what she'd just said. But the shift in her posture, the edge in her voice, the authority behind her calm, it told him something had changed. Alana turned and walked slowly back toward her seat. As she passed the jury box, she caught her reflection in the old polished trim, a strange architectural leftover from another era. She paused. "They want silence," she whispered to herself, just audible to the man nearest her. "Let's show them what silence can see." Then she sat. Not just sat, she claimed her space again, her bruises still visible, her voice still soft. But something about her had taken up more room, not physically, spiritually, like her silence now had weight. Jessica Rayner glanced nervously at the judge. Langford pretended not to see it. No one moved. For the first time all day, the courtroom had no idea what came next. And that was exactly how Alana needed it. The inner circle begins to unravel as they plot their next move. The heavy oak door shut behind them with a deep thud that seemed to silence the air itself. Inside the dim chambers adjacent to the courtroom, 3 figures loomed under the glow of a single overhead lamp. Judge Gregory Langford sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. To his left, District Attorney Jessica Rayner clutched a folder that was thinner than it should have been. Across from them stood Police Chief Callahan, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Jessica was the first to speak. Her voice was low and tight. "We have a problem. The footage is missing, yes, but something about her does not sit right. Her background does not match. There is no employment record, no current residential listing that leads anywhere." Langford's eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. "So what you are saying is that she is not who she claims to be." Callahan shook his head, jaw tense. "Or she is exactly who we hope she is not." Langford stood up, walking slowly to the small window that overlooked the courthouse lawn. "Then we drown her. Not with noise, with silence. We bury her in procedures, delay every request, overrule her objections, let her wither in the system she thinks she can expose." Jessica hesitated. Her lips parted, unsure if she should push further. "And if she speaks again?" Langford did not turn. "Make sure no one listens." A heavy pause followed before Callahan broke it. "Then we bring in Valerie." At the mention of her name, the air in the room seemed to shift. Jessica gave Callahan a sharp look. "Are you serious?" "We need someone who knows how to handle complications," Langford said without hesitation. Moments later, the door opened with a quiet click. Officer Valerie Royce stepped inside. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, her steps confident, her uniform impeccable. She stopped at the table, eyes moving directly to the manila folder Langford pushed toward her. She opened it. One photo, Alana Monroe. Valerie held it between 2 fingers, her face unreadable. "She doesn't look like much." But the way she said it made it clear she had already sized Alana up as a threat. Callahan's tone was colder than before. "She is more dangerous than she appears." Valerie slid the photo back inside and closed the folder. "Then I'll make sure she disappears the moment she steps out of line." Jessica spoke cautiously. "This cannot get messy. No bruises, no press." Valerie gave her a thin smile. "Messy is not my style. Clean and irreversible works just fine." Langford nodded once. "Keep her under, quietly." Valerie was already walking out the door when she paused and turned back. "If she reaches for the mic again, I'll make sure she never finishes her sentence." As the door clicked shut, Jessica exhaled slowly. The tension in the room lingered like smoke after a fire. Callahan muttered under his breath, "There's blood in the water." Langford's voice was calm, absolute. "Then make sure she's the one bleeding." The first wave crashes and dignity meets the force of a system built to silence. The courtroom was tense still, as if even the air dared not move. Alana stood once more, her posture composed yet unyielding. Her voice, when it rose, did not tremble. It struck clearly through the room like a bell slicing through fog. "Why is asking for the full video considered disruption?" No one answered. Not at first. The silence was not uncertainty. It was strategy. Judge Langford shifted behind the bench, leaning forward slowly, his lips curling into a smirk, too calm for justice. "This court will not tolerate theatrics. Miss Monroe, you are out of order." Alana remained standing, Then let the record show that truth itself is what you consider disorder. The murmurs began in the gallery, a rustle of coats, a sharp breath from someone in the back, and then Langford raised his voice. Bailiff removed the defendant from the courtroom. It was not just a command. It was a message. And that message had already been delivered before the words even left his lips. Valerie Royce stepped forward. Her boots struck the floor with precision, the kind of walk that said she had waited for this moment. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't need to. Her eyes were already locked on Alana. Alana didn't flinch. Valerie reached for the handcuffs and her fingers were as cold as her eyes. She twisted one of Alana's arms behind her back, fast and deliberate. Then the other. The steel clicked shut. Hard. Too hard. A gasp rang out from somewhere near the middle rows. An older woman had stood up, her gloved hand pressed over her mouth. This is wrong. She didn't do anything. This is wrong. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she sat back down before the bailiff even glanced her way. But her cry had landed. It had splintered the stillness. And suddenly the gallery wasn't so quiet anymore. Alana exhaled slowly, her jaw clenched. Her arms were pinned behind her, but her spine remained straight. Her dignity refused to bend. Valerie leaned close and whispered just loud enough for Alana to hear. Not so strong now, are you? But Alana turned her head just slightly and replied in a voice that stayed impossibly calm. Strength isn't how tight you squeeze a wrist. It's how steady your eyes stay when the truth's in pain. Valerie pulled. Hard. Alana's body jerked slightly, her shoulders twisting with the pressure. But she didn't cry out. She didn't resist. She looked ahead, right at the judge. And then she spoke loud enough for the room to hear. Make sure your robe is clean, Judge. Cameras are watching. There was a pause, just a heartbeat. Langford's face flickered. Just for a moment. A twitch in his brow, a tightening of the mouth. But he recovered quickly. Take her out. Valerie began walking, dragging Alana behind her. But Alana didn't stumble. Every step was controlled, deliberate, measured. As if she knew exactly where the cameras were. As if she knew this too would be seen, would be remembered. A reporter seated near the back scribbled notes faster than his hand could keep up. A man near the aisle looked at his wife and whispered, "They're trying to shut her up. They're scared." Outside the chamber doors, as they swung open, a sliver of light broke through the hallway. Alana stepped through it, flanked by force, but not defeated. Her body was restrained, but her presence had never been louder. The courtroom froze the moment Alana stood up. She was no longer just a black woman on trial. She became something else entirely, a symbol of quiet power finally stepping into the light. Calmly, deliberately, she reached into her folder and pulled out a metal badge. Under the pale yellow glow of the courtroom lights, the words glinted clearly. Deputy Director, Internal Affairs Division, FBI. Her voice was calm but unwavering, and it cut through the silence like a blade. My name is Alana Monroe. I am not just the accused. I am the one investigating all of you. Judge Langford shot up from the bench, scrambling for control. He raised his voice, trying to hold on to the last scraps of authority. This is outrageous. I will not allow this courtroom to be hijacked by theatrics. But before he could finish, the courtroom doors burst open. Micah Green stepped inside, composed and steady. Behind him walked two men in gray suits, no visible badges, their eyes sharp and unreadable. One of them approached the judge's bench, dropped a folder with a federal seal, and spoke firmly. Federal order. Step aside, Your Honor. A ripple moved through the room. At first, whispers, then gasps. Valerie, the officer who had once gripped Alana's wrists so tightly she drew blood, stepped back instinctively. The contempt in her eyes was gone. What replaced it was confusion, and maybe for the first time, fear. Her gaze flicked from the badge on the table to Alana, as if the image alone demanded an apology. At the prosecution table, Jessica Rayner tried to gather her things quietly. But one of the federal agents intercepted her. He handed her a sealed manila envelope without saying a word. Federal subpoena. You are required to appear before an internal tribunal. Rayner's face twitched. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Whatever defense she had prepared dissolved in her throat. Alana stepped into the center of the courtroom. Her steps were slow and deliberate, the air around her charged with a quiet storm. This was the same place where she'd been publicly accused, humiliated, and silenced. Now it became the place where she took back every ounce of dignity stolen from her. She looked directly at Langford. Then she turned her eyes to the rows of people who had judged her with their silence. Some avoided her gaze, others met it and quickly looked away. Her voice came low and steady, every word landing like a gavel strike. "We do not knock twice. You heard the knock. This is the entry." No one dared to respond. The room was still, not from shock alone, but from the weight of realization. Alana was not just defending herself. She had been watching, documenting, waiting. Now the moment had come, and it was no longer their courtroom. It was hers. And in that silence, something changed. People no longer saw a defendant. They saw the truth. They saw the woman who had been listening all along. And they saw that justice, real justice, had finally walked in. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than ever, like the weight of a storm just moments from breaking. Then it happened. With a click that echoed too loud in the silence, Micah Green turned on the projector. On the wall behind him, grainy security footage began to play. But this time, it wasn't edited, it wasn't muted or cut. It showed everything. The courtroom watched in breathless stillness as Brent Colby's face came into focus. The footage showed him shoving Alana against a patrol car, twisting her wrists behind her back with brutal force. Her voice, calm and non-threatening, was drowned out by his yelling. When she winced in pain and tried to ask what was happening, he slammed her head forward. No weapon, no resistance, just fear and force. Gasps erupted across the room. The judge's gavel did not come down. Langford sat frozen. Then another sound filled the courtroom, a voice recording grainy but unmistakable. "We need to keep this under wraps. If she's who we think she is, we bury it." That was Langford. The next voice was Rayner's. She sounded sharp, urgent. "I've already deleted the segments. Colby knows not to talk." Then Callahan. "We can't let this go up the chain. She's just one woman. Make her disappear." The room stirred, energy rising. People turned to one another, their faces twisting in disbelief. Leonard Carter, who had sat quietly in the back for most of the trial, stood slowly. He was holding a folded, worn piece of paper, something that had aged with him. He walked to the front of the courtroom without asking for permission. "I was there," he said, voice shaking but firm. 20 years ago. I saw them do it to a boy, just like they did to her. I wrote it down. I kept it. And today I'm not staying silent." He handed the paper to Micah. Alana nodded gently, like she already knew he'd find the strength. The courtroom felt like it cracked open. A woman in the front row, the same older woman who had wept earlier, let out a sob, covering her face with trembling hands. Beside her, a young man murmured, "I had no idea. I didn't want to see it." Judge Langford didn't move. His face was pale lips, drawn tight eyes, darting like a man trapped by the truth. There was nowhere left to look. Alana stepped forward. Her presence filled the room, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Justice isn't delayed. It's arrived. And it's watching. Every word landed like a verdict, and no one could deny what they had seen. For the first time, the courtroom felt like a place where truth was louder than power. And Alana, who had walked in as the accused, now stood as the one delivering judgment. The story that started in a courtroom no one had ever heard of quickly ignited across the country. Within hours, news vans circled the courthouse like vultures sensing a reckoning. Headlines flashed across national broadcasts. Federal agent uncovers corruption in live trial, and Deputy FBI Director exposes systemic abuse. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones angled like arrows toward anyone stepping out of the building. Inside the courtroom, the trial had paused, but the world had started watching. A live feed from one of the local stations caught the moment when Micah Green's voice echoed across the wooden panels. It was firm, steady, and impossible to ignore. Behind him, the video footage played in full, unedited, uninterrupted. Brent Colby's assault on Alana unfolded in grim, undeniable detail. Gasps turned to fury. What had once been suspicion became something raw and real. Social media ignited. The hashtag #StandWithAlana trended within the hour, crossing over 1 million uses by nightfall. Celebrities reposted. Civil rights leaders called it a turning point. But it wasn't the famous voices that gave the moment weight, it was the ordinary ones. People shared their own stories. Mothers posted about their sons. Fathers posted about their fears. It became more than a hashtag. It became a mirror. On a nearby news segment, a young black law student barely 20 stood outside the courthouse with tears in his eyes. The anchor held out a mic, but he didn't wait for a question. He just said, "She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for all of us." And somehow that clip traveled faster than any press release. It landed in inboxes, group chats, boardrooms, and classrooms. It became the sound of a generation finding its voice. Inside City Hall, the mayor's phone didn't stop ringing. Community organizers staged sit-ins, demanding immediate reform. Civil rights attorneys submitted petitions to re-examine dozens of cases that had passed through Judge Langford's court in the last 10 years. Protesters stood outside the police precinct holding signs that read, "We see you now." The ripple effect hit harder than anyone expected. Valerie, the white female officer who had once grabbed Alana so carelessly, was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. The internal review cited patterned misconduct and willful abuse of process. For the first time in her career, she found herself on the other side of the badge facing the very scrutiny she once ignored. Sheriff Callahan didn't even wait for formal charges. That morning, he resigned without a press conference, just a typed letter left on his desk. No goodbye, no defense, just silence. Back in Washington, the Department of Justice held a closed-door session. But one photo leaked a single image of Alana Monroe standing beside the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI. No smile, no podium, just three people who understood exactly what silence had cost and what truth had reclaimed. Alana didn't give interviews. She didn't need to. Her silence was already speaking louder than most could ever shout. But when asked to appear before a special hearing on police accountability, she accepted. She entered the chamber in the same dark suit she wore in court. No jewelry, no makeup, just presence. And when the committee chair asked her what she believed justice should look like moving forward, she said simply, "Justice doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs to be heard without being interrupted." The room fell quiet, because everyone knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It never really was. That week, universities requested transcripts of the trial for curriculum. Faith leaders led sermons on moral courage. A mural of Alana appeared on a brick wall downtown painted overnight. It showed her standing tall in court with the words, "Silence when rooted in truth is louder than a gavel." And for the first time in a long time, people didn't just watch history. They felt part of it. America had heard a story. But more than that, it had heard itself, its flaws, its fear, its awakening. And in the stillness that followed, the echo didn't fade. It grew louder. The sun was beginning to slip behind the courthouse when Alana stepped out onto the steps. A warm breeze carried the murmur of voices. Then the sound grew louder, not in anger, but in something quieter and deeper. Applause. It started with just a few hands, but it spread like ripples on still water. People stood clapped, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists clenched not in rage but in reverence. Alana didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her expression was composed, unreadable, but behind her eyes was the weight of everything that had just happened. She had not come to win. She had come to reveal. And sometimes that was heavier than any verdict. Leonard Carter, the retired doorman who had sat quietly through most of the trial, made his way through the crowd. His steps were slow but steady. When he reached her, he didn't ask for a photo or even shake her hand. He just leaned in slightly and said, "Thank you for being louder than the rest of us ever dared to be." She met his gaze and held it for a moment, long enough for him to know that his words had landed. Then she turned and looked back at the building that for years had been a place where truth was distorted and voices were crushed beneath legal jargon and polished robes. Micah Green stood quietly beside her, his phone buzzing non-stop in his pocket. She didn't look at him when she spoke, just kept her eyes on the courthouse. "This was never about me," she said softly. "It's about every voice they tried to bury." He nodded. He didn't need to say anything. He had seen enough to understand that her calm wasn't emptiness. It was discipline. Alana didn't go to any interviews that evening. She didn't sit for news anchors or pose for cameras. Instead, she returned to her office, the same small room where she had first reviewed the file that started it all. Her desk was cluttered, the light overhead buzzed faintly, and in the corner sat a stack of folders marked Internal Audit. She sat down, removed her blazer, and rolled up her sleeves. There was still work to do. Outside, her name was being chanted on college campuses, printed on signs added to school curriculums. But inside these walls, she was just another federal officer trying to undo decades of damage one thread at a time. She began mapping out a new protocol, one that would prevent another Brent Colby, another Rayner, another Langford from rising through unchecked cracks. Somewhere down the hall, someone dropped a file. She didn't flinch. She just kept writing. Because Alana Monroe didn't fight for attention. She fought for silence to mean safety again, not fear. Later that night, a single voice narrated the ending of a documentary already being produced. The screen faded to black as these final words echoed gently like a whisper that had traveled too far to stop now. Sometimes silence is survival, but sometimes silence is the battle cry. And in living rooms across the country, people sat still holding their breath without realizing it. Not because of what had been said, but because of what had finally been heard. If this story moved you, if Alana's quiet strength stirred something deep inside, take a moment to let that feeling settle. This wasn't just about one woman standing up in court. It was about dignity when no one's watching, about truth refusing to be silenced, and about how silence when chosen with purpose can speak louder than any voice in the room. At Mr. Max, our stories, we share stories that matter, stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what courage really looks like. If this one meant something to you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories, just like this one. Your support means everything. Every like, every share, every new subscriber gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that push for justice, compassion, and lasting change. And always remember, sometimes the quietest voice leaves the loudest mark. See you in the next story.